12 even.
Yeah, we're all done.
Does anybody know that somebody is definitely on their way? Or no? Right. Okie doke then. In which case, hello, my name is Yvette, and welcome to Friday Report Out. Apologies from Julian this week. He is at the guiding board in London, and sometimes he beams in and watches us. So I don't know whether they will today. It depends what time their lunch break is. So it's great. We've got 3 report outs today. 2 of them are 90-day report outs. But the first one is Mike, one of our clinical leadership fellows. Oh, we have somebody else walking down the corridor at the moment. And Mike is a specialty registrar in GUM when he's not out of programme. But he's been working on a particular QI project during his leadership year, and it's got a snappy title, and I'm sure he's got some slides. Welcome, come on in. So I'll hand over to you, Mike.
Hello. So my name is Mike Ewan. So I'm here to report out on a local quality improvement project at Leeds Sexual Health called Rescue, and that stands for Reducing Errors in Sexual Health Samples, a quality improvement project. So for those in the audience that don't know about Leeds Sexual Health, it is an integrated sexual health service for the city that looks after the sexual health care and contraception needs for the Leeds community, and it's a partnership between LCH, LTH and third sector organisation. So it isn't unfortunately lean methodology, but it is using the Institute for Healthcare Improvement model for improvement, so testing PDSA cycles. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and the PDSA cycles that we have done, some results, and there'll be a little time for questions and any future work that we're planning to do. So background to the project. So I've worked within Leeds Sexual Health Service for about a year, and previous to that I worked within York. Within Leeds Sexual Health we don't have electronic requesting for our samples currently, and that's currently on our risk register. So what we have to do is we have to handwrite all of our requests, and invariably we can send between 2 and 5 samples per patient that we see. So there's a large degree of error in terms of handwriting all of those patient identifiers. And if we just have a simple error in transcription, we can send a declaration form to the laboratory in order to accept the risk that actually we think, to the best of our knowledge, that this is the patient's sexual health sample, and please can you process it. And in our service, healthcare assistants are responsible for doing that for us. And they complained perhaps in about March, April time that they had a significant amount of work in filling out these declaration forms. So I wanted to have a little look into it. And so you try and get some data, and we found out that we would probably be getting between 20 and 40 rejected samples per week. And so we wanted to have a little bit more of an in-depth look at what we were doing. So in the 6.5 months of 2019, footfall through clinic is just shy of 20,000. And within those samples, we had 600 rejected samples to 500 patients. And when we think about that in terms of percentage of footfall, that's 2.5% of patients coming through the service, which doesn't sound a lot. But I challenged the team to think of it in a different way. So our busiest clinic, our symptomatic clinic, where people walk in and wait, we see about 50 patients a day. So if you think about it in a slightly different way, you probably got it wrong for every single patient that come in to walk and wait for 2 weeks. And that is a significant number of patients with that 6 months. And considering that currently we turn about 50 patients away a day who are either asymptomatic or symptomatic, we really do need to get it right so that we can reach the sort of demand for the local population. So this is a statistical process control chart, so I don't know whether everyone's fully familiar with them, but I'll just run you through it very briefly. So along the x-axis you have weeks within 2019, and along the y-axis you have number of rejected samples per week, and these little plots are the number of samples per week, and this black line is the mean number of samples rejected per week, and this dashed line allows you to know that any plots, so the orange plots, are not due to common cause variation. You have to investigate why they occurred. So Pareto analysis. So Pareto analysis looks at the vital few for the trivial many. So if you look cumulatively at 80% of the rejected samples like we did, then addressing 20% of the problem, you'll get your biggest result. Okay, so in our service, the labelling of samples was the biggest error, and then those that leaked as well. So we wanted to have a intervention that would address both of those. So when we looked in depth at them, so this is quite a busy slide, but I'll just highlight a few points. 50% of those that had a leaked sample within the 100 that we looked at in depth had a missed opportunity to test. That means they either didn't come back to our service or we couldn't process their sample. And we didn't just get it wrong once, we got it wrong twice for many of those patients. So they were having to come back to our service on more than one occasion. But actually in one episode, we actually got it wrong 3 times. And when we think about people having to come into our service, people feel a lot of guilt, shame and stigma about attending a sexual health service, and particularly when they're having to get undressed in front of a stranger and we're doing intimate examinations, it is really sort of unacceptable, really. And when we extrapolate those results to the 600 rejected samples, what we did find is that 70% of people, of those 500, actually needed to come back into our service. But a third of those never come back at all. Even if we try and rebook them an appointment, they just don't attend. And then overall that leads to a third of people having a missed opportunity to test. And within Leeds, what we do know is that we have high rates of antimicrobial resistance, particularly with gonorrhea. But we've had a 25% increase in syphilis in the last 3 years, and it's becoming a real public health concern for the city. What this slide shows is that it does affect all of our sites, but particularly Merrion Centre, which is our level 3 service where we can perform on-site microscopy. So we wanted to implement our intervention there first, and all staff get it wrong. You know, no one comes to work in the morning to do a bad job, so it's about educating everyone. So our aim was basically to get an 80% reduction of rejected microbiology samples from Leeds Sexual Health within 4 months. And in order to do that, we created a driver diagram to make sure that everyone had the same aims and ambitions. So our intervention, we did some process mapping to look at how we request samples. And very simply, I'm not going to go through all of this, but all we did was we implemented a second check within our local laboratory. We got the healthcare assistants who were really on board actually to double check actually, do these patient labels match up to the request form and those that are on the sample? And if they do, we stamp it initially and let it go to the LTHT laboratory. And we had some really interesting results. So we implemented our second check in the 2nd of September. And what we did know is that in April, when it was highlighted to the service and we were feeding back, we actually had a statistically significant improvement just by highlighting the issue. So up until April, we had a mean average rejected sample of 22.5 per week. And then by highlighting the issue, we got to about 20.9 per week. And then when we implemented our step change, our mean dropped to 10.2 within 6 weeks, which was statistically significant. So a 50% improvement just from the PDSA-1. And then we thought, well, what can we do instead? How can we get this better? How can we reach our aim? And so when we had our 50% improvement, we decided to celebrate that. So we had our local business manager come and present their team with a certificate, and the service brought everyone breakfast. And it really did go down really well. If you think about that cost of that celebration, it cost about £40 for us to celebrate. And the average symptomatic patient going to the sexual health service costs about £250. So a really small gesture can go a very long way. So our means continued to improve. So I actually thought the mean didn't vary weekly on an SPC chart, but you learn something new every week. So I thought we were going to have a statistically significant improvement of 77% this week. But we've got a statistically significant improvement overall. We're about 61%, but next week, if we actually get 8 or less rejected samples, we're probably going to reach our aim of 80%. It took us slightly longer than 4 months, but it's really, really good work from Leeds Sexual Health. And so how do we feed that back? So we let the team know through a notice board or via email how many samples are being rejected. But we also celebrate the success, and we learn from our first attempts in learning. I took that from this year. So it's really important that we share all of our successes and failures with the team. So future work, we're looking at when we reach our aims, sustainability. We've upscaled into all of our spoke sites. So Leeds Sexual Health doesn't just work out of Merion. We have centres in Birmingham, Toffs, and various other sites within the city. And we want to further embed this continuous improvement culture that has led to us becoming an outstanding sexual health service from the CQC. And we want to share this with other integrated sexual health services. I'd like to just acknowledge everyone at Leeds Sexual Health for being so on board with this project. Samia, who actually helped me with some of the data, who's one of the core medical trainees, the LCH board, LTHTQI department, my supervisor Ali, but also Nicola at the back, who's been working with me at looking in depth at sort of why samples leak within the laboratory at LTH, and Chris Wilson and Kathy Dayton, who provide some of the IT and data support for this project. Just quickly before I fully sum up, I just wanted to let everyone know about something that's quite exciting for the Trust. On the 28th of February, we are launching a QI network whereby people can come for support about how to develop their QI skills, but also sort of managers who want to support their staff to develop their skills can also come and see what help is available out there. We've got some very interesting speakers, so Yvette's going to be opening the session for us, but we've got Robert Varnum, who's coming as well, who's a lead guru for NHS improvement. So it's not just for model for improvement, it's sort of aligning the incentives with KPO as well, and we'll have KPO representatives there. So if anyone wants to book on, we can make sure that this is circulated and you can join. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thanks very much, Michael. I had no idea that you were still handwriting requests from the service.
Yes.
Now the usual format is that we do all the report outs and then we do questions at the end. So I think we'll carry on, because for those people who are watching, they might have limited time. So I think, Deborah, are you up next on the 90-day report out on ophthalmology outpatients?
My name is Deborah Hall. I'm the head of nursing for Head and Neck CSU, and I was the team leader for the Kaizen event that we held last year. So our aim was to look at the services that we provide and revisit 2 previous RPIWs where we looked at, first of all, how a patient checks in and the time it takes to check in. and then also the time it takes for the nursing staff to set up the clinics and to be ready to see the patients. We were joined within our RPIW with the outpatient CSU who support us with our receptioning of our clinics and are an integral part making sure that everything flows. So from the point at which we did the original RPIWs, which were 2017-18, things changed. So previously patients would wait outside the clinic for the doors to open at 8:30, and there would be a stampede of patients coming through those doors. They literally would queue down the corridor almost to A&E previously. And so we changed things before this event, and patients were entering the space at 8:15, but they could only check in if they self-checked in, which can be challenging for patients who are visually impaired, but is something that we would like to encourage them to do. Otherwise, there was a sea of expectant faces looking at Lynn and colleagues from reception, and the minute they opened the reception desk fully, they had a stampede of patients wanting to check in, and then everybody was kind of, patients were anxious, am I first, etc, etc. And bear in mind, we run at least 15 clinics in the space. Working out who is first is a challenge in itself. So we looked at the lead time from arrival until the first nurse review, which is when you have your vision checked. And we looked at the layout of the clinic and how organised things were for the staff to actually set up, because there's a lot of equipment to prepare and a lot of things that are locked up that you have to take out on a daily basis to set clinics up. So in terms of our 5Sing, we did some work around that. And then we looked at setup reduction, the time spent preparing for either the next part of the journey, but actually the clinic itself being ready, because while the visioning is happening, clinic is still being set up, because there's not enough time kind of between 8 and 8:15 to fully set up at least 15 rooms. So our aim was to have the visioning rooms ready first, while the staff were then doing the other pieces of work. So in terms of lead time from arrival to first nurse review, the reception staff trialled and agreed opening the doors, as it were, and start checking people in from the 8:15. But since that time, they've actually moved it back, so they open around about 8 o'clock, so that as people are arriving, they're being checked in flow. And that was something that they were unsure about to begin with, but have found it's much better than being confronted by a queue of people just a little bit later on in the morning. And we've also, through outpatient CSU, had a massive improvement in the number of volunteers, so trying to encourage and show people how to complete self-check-in has also made a difference. I think there's only a couple of times now in the week where there isn't volunteering, they're still actively... Two now. So that's making a difference both for reception staff, but again, as I say, for the patients. So actually timing became a challenge, because actually the patients are arriving in flow from 8 o'clock, and we're never really ready until 8:15 in terms of that vision, but we have tracked it from being ready to that first review, and we have achieved the target that was set with that 2 minutes. And part of that is also down to the fact that we introduced a more robust huddle at the beginning of the morning that now includes the reception staff. It includes ophthalmology admin staff who can tell us if anybody's missing, if there's delays, there's a tracker for equipment, etc. And work is allocated more robustly as well. There was a bit of a tendency for everybody to be going off setting up clinic, but actually without a great purpose. And they've introduced standard work now across all the rooms, which is something that we had done in Cornell, but if you go in, there's kind of a map on the trolley, so you know where everything goes, so again the doctors can see if everything's ready. And then in terms of the overall setup reduction, again that was a bit of a challenge. Clinic invariably wasn't ready till about 9:15 with the way the nurses were working before, other than the visioning, and it's now ready at 8:30, but again tracking those measures based on what we've done, we've got kind of that time down to about 10 minutes for the setup, but overall to do everything, so we've pulled it back by at least 15 minutes, and that's consistent now, so that's definitely an improvement. This was the production board when we first started. Some of you will have seen this before, so it had very little on it, and this is now what it looks like in terms of staff allocation and preparedness, and again messages about if something's broken, who's reported it, what's the reference number, so time's not wasted either walking around checking who knows what's happened to it. The only bit of the work that we've yet to fully embed, but in terms of the actual overall work, we've achieved what we set out to do. We tried to introduce the medical staff, indicating if they'd arrived in clinic, because it's actually really hard to know, because a lot of them go to their allocated room and then there's a question, are they here, are they not, are they ready for their first patient, so they wanted to indicate the time on the board that they're here. They all work a little bit differently. Some go off and read the notes in preparation, some have done that in advance, etc. And that element is not as well embedded as yet for us to know that everybody is in clinic and when they're ready to see patients. The idea being that we can try and inform patients if there is a delay, if somebody's held up or something happens that means it's going to take a bit longer for their clinic to start. But we have a new ward clerk who's starting for clinic in February, and part of her role will be to try and embed that element by being kind of the flea in the ear, as they say. You haven't told us you're here, because ultimately we said, you know, if you don't tell us you're here, you may not get a patient, which might sound tempting, but actually for the patients they need to be seen as in flow as we can, and for staff to know that they're in, so it's really hard for us to know if everybody's in, if you're in a room with a patient already, you know, and if somebody's off sick and we don't know. We have had occasions previously where it's probably an hour into clinic before people think, actually nobody's moving there, because patients have their vision done, they might see the optician in between, they might go for photography, and then they might arrive with the clinician, or they may have the vision and see the clinician first. So although you'd think we would know, there's kind of sometimes 200 patients booked into that space plus relatives, so it's really important for us to try and have some way of at least keeping track of the clinic. So from our side, patients check in from 8 o'clock, which reduces the queue in, and that stampede to check in at 8:30. The feedback we've had, and certainly Lynn and team on reception, patients' feedback as they're leaving, that it feels much better. We have a lot of regular attenders, so it is something we've been able to measure, you know, how was it before and how does it feel now. Staff are ready to undertake the vision test earlier, and patients feel like they're moving through and ready to see the clinician a bit sooner. And we've pulled back, as I say, that overall clinic setup time. And standard work and the huddle have improved the preparation and planning for the clinic, which also included moving some work to the end of clinic the night before, so that only the things that really need to happen on the morning are happening on the morning where possible. So some changes are quickly adapted, others require more time and sometimes those resources to ensure good engagement, but hopefully will improve that medical element of it, because it's not a lack of will. We've got 27 consultants who work at Seacroft, St James's, Wharfdale and St George's, so it's inevitable that it takes a bit of time to get that message embedded and just those reminders for good practice. We did involve different members of the team to develop ideas once the initial event had taken place, and that's really worked. And again, our collaboration with Outpatient CSU has been really effective, particularly with the volunteers. And kind of for me, some changes impact on the way you capture the data, but the key benefit of this has been working to improve the patient and the staff experience, and we feel we've achieved that. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. That was, it sounds like you're really making progress there, and it's really great to see the percentage change and your improvements. So, are you looking towards closing that RPSW down there?
Yes.
Yeah. Great, okay. Well, I'm sure there'll be some more questions for you. But now we've got critical care and neurosciences, step-down value stream, and in a 90-day report out from Crystal, the business manager from spinal surgery, on the scheduling RPIW. So thank you, Crystal. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Crystal Alban, Business Manager for Spinal Surgery, and I am reporting on our RPIW, which is about theatre scheduling. So we're looking at our own in-house procedures, but we're also looking at how we work with other people in other CSUs, so anaesthetics and pre-assessment people like that. The metrics that we've completed and we're making good progress on here, I've reported on them last month, so I won't spend too much time on them, but our lead time has come down 52%. So that's the time that we get the booking form to the amount of time that we actually get a patient a TCI date. So that's great, that's come down. Staff walking distance has reduced by 66%. Again, great, that's the amount of time the theatre scheduling team are spending on foot gathering the information that they need to actually book that TCI date. Work in progress has gone down from 41 pieces of work to 14 pieces of work. So that's only 14 pieces of work that are half completed that we don't know when it's going to be completed. So again, that's great. Patients not answering our phone calls is greatly reduced. We had an issue before where we would be ringing patients to book TCI dates and they weren't answering the phone. So we had theatre lists that were sort of half drafted, but nobody was answering to confirm. We're now sending a letter, and we also follow that up with a 10-day phone call just to make sure that they know that they're coming. We've only had 3 occurrences over 3 months of those patients not answering the phones. That's caused some level of panic for me, but we've managed to find a way forward each time. The date the patient offered not being acceptable, again, it's reduced because we're giving people 3 weeks notice rather than in some cases a day's notice. People are able to arrange their own lives around that. Those patients that are ringing us up and saying, actually, I can't make that date, we're able to say to them, that's fine, but you won't get scheduled until May. And we can give a date and they can decide from that point on, are they going to wait till May or are they going to take the original date that we've got. So that's all good progress. We've still got a lot more stuff to do. We've actually started working on other metrics as well, which we didn't think about at the time of the RPIW. DNAs were a bit of a worry. If we're sending out letters, are we going to have patients not turning up on the day? Well, we've mitigated that with our phone call. So we haven't had any DNAs from fixed booking, which I'm quite relieved about. We've got more patients that have been booked with a TCI or a to-come-in date. So as an example, in October, we had 104 patients with confirmed TCIs. We're now at 143 booked with TCIs. That includes our independent sector lists as well. We've recently put some administrative support in just to make sure that we're utilising those lists as best we can as well, and that's going really well. Getting really good feedback about that and about the member of staff who's coordinating that. Booking ahead, the culture has changed within the team. We were probably only booked a week ahead at a point in October. It was quite dire. We've got patients booked in for sort of April and March. Some of the consultants have been able to give us the leave well in advance, and we're able to actually just book those patients. We get a lot of PALs and complaints in particularly spinal surgery that we're not communicating with our patients. So by giving them that date, that's stopping the phone calls coming in saying, well, when am I going to be seen? Or even the complaints, which we then obviously have to write to. We've started looking at the fill rate as well. The fill rate at 93%, really pleased with that. It's never going to be 100% for us because we've got high-grade urgent patients that will book in typically for a Friday the day before. We have to do that because we see them in clinic on the same day. And as you can see, the fill rate is getting much, much better. Again, that's been quite bad in the past, so we're going to continue to keep building that. Acute cases, unfortunately, this week have dislodged some elective cases, so we've got some things that we don't know that are happening quite yet for next week, but we can sort that out. Theatre schedules, we were sending out a week at a time, letting our anaesthetist colleagues know these are the patients we've got booked in, these are the bed levels we've got. We're now sending out 2 weeks. At the end of February, we're aiming to send out 3 weeks, and eventually we'll keep going on that so we can give as much notice as possible of our planned lists. One metric that I feel like we've still got a lot of work to do is getting the bed level correct on the day. I've gathered some feedback here, and people are saying it's better, but it's not there yet. It's really difficult because people look at a patient, and each patient will need a different bed level according to who you speak to. So anaesthetist 1 might say we need HDU, anaesthetist 2 might say you'll be okay with a ward bed, our consultant might come in and say that we need something completely different. The beds available on the day might lead our matrons to say, well, actually we can get away with putting that patient in a ward bed. So it's very, very, very complex to try and get it right for each patient. There's some education still to do around educating people what those different bed levels are. Indeed, they've changed since we started doing the RPIW due to closures of wards and things like that. So trying to keep on top of that is actually really, really difficult. All we can do within our department at the moment is keep scheduling in advance so that we can at least try and have our best guess on what that bed level is. And we'll just have to keep going forward with that and working with people. There's ongoing work in another RPIW actually, I think, with pre-assessment, and they've got an electronic document that's got the finalised bedding, and we could really do with that going electronic so that everybody has access to that document. And we know sometimes because our spinal patients, some of them have been on our list for over 52 weeks, and we have a paper booking form which has got all some of the details of the beds on. Well, we don't have that access available on the computer because it's a paper-based thing, so we have to go and find the information. So again, having it electronic, it just makes it easier to find. But continuing to send out lists should make that a little bit better, and we still need to work with our colleagues in other areas to make sure that we're correcting that. We've still got work to do as well in theatre scheduling after our 90 days. At the moment, we're struggling with scheduling our urgent patients. It's not easy. On the PAS system, you can put somebody as urgent or routine. It's not that easy in real life. You can have a more urgent patient than another. So we would like to be able to put 1, 2, 3 so that we know how urgent those patients are. Chronological booking is really, really difficult to get right, and there's still some blockers there. The theatre type, it really affects us. We can't put some patients in some of our Gilbert Scott theatres or our Chalk theatres, so it's really difficult to try and get the patient in the right place at the right time. We've also got urgent cases coming in, and we've got joint cases as well where we maybe need to lead with other people in other CSUs. At the moment as well, the acutes are coming in quite thick and fast. We've had to cancel 2 elective lists from this week for 2 all-day acute lists. So again, where we might be booked for next week, that's going to displace people. So it's difficult to try and get the jigsaw right. We are doing a project where we are reassigning patients to consultants with smaller waiting lists. Some of the consultants are absolutely great with that. Yep, get them into clinic, let me get them met and we can get them operated on. Some consultants understandably want to keep hold of the patients because they've built up a relationship with them, they've got a plan. So that work's still ongoing, and that's slowly becoming part of the culture. What we need from others going forward to sort of help our cause, we could do with that pre-assessment document being available on PPM electronically. We would love to be able to run reports detailing bed levels. So when we've got a list that's sort of 2/3 full, we could do with being able to run a report that quickly tells us if we've got 2 hours left, what have we got on that list that is 2 hours long that we could get in there. Then we can look and see who's been the longest waiter, etc. Because that is done manually at the moment, and that is not the best way to do it. We need more resources to help manage our acute work, which probably won't come as a surprise to anybody. We need theatre space and staff so that we know that we've got our elective lists and we can plan them, and I know that that affects everybody. We've been doing operating at Chalk, which has been really helpful because it's a cold site, so we know that those cases are more than likely to go ahead on that day, whereas if you do the same cases here, we're running around trying to make sure we can get the acutes and the electives in. So that's been really useful, but going forward we need to sort of secure some theatre space here for acutes. And then just an electronic system on PAS just to rate our urgent patients would be really, really helpful, and would make all the difference. We've been reflecting, and a lot of the things that have gone well are due to communication and working with other people in other departments, and it's that one thing that's made the big difference, I think. And you know, it's just one thing, working with other departments, making sure that they're understanding where we're coming from and vice versa. That's the magic, really. And that's where we're up to now. We've still got more to do, though.
Thanks, Crystal. You raced through that and gave lots of information. Thank you very much to all 3 of our presenters. You're clearly doing loads of improvement work, and I think communication is key to all of them, isn't it? But it's really lovely to hear the successes and the achievements, and also to see the similarities in the kind of barriers that there are to getting this work progressed, not least of which are the amount of things that everybody would like digitalising. But you know, we keep making progress with that. So can I open it up to questions now? Andy?
Question for Michael, just a quick one. You, I think, suggested that the celebration of success brought about improvement in itself, or certainly associated with it. Do you think that was the case?
I think it certainly helped re-embed that the interventions working and led to continued sustained levels of improvement. There were two little cases of where there was weeks where there was special cause variation as a result, but we think that's due to our third sector organisation, whereby samples have leaked on the way. So it wasn't particularly due to the intervention per se. I think, giving people the data and actually giving them something, celebrating what they've done well does actually increase morale and lets people who potentially don't really get that much recognition when things are going well for them. So sort of the healthcare assistants, clerical staff, it's really important to make them feel part of the clinical team, and actually, you are responsible for this change. And certainly it's now just become that the second check is embedded, and certainly that they really helped the healthcares sort of take that through to the spoke sites.
Certainly as an organisation, I think we're getting better and better at celebrating success, and we know the value of it, but I do like the idea that it can be an intervention in itself, so I might do more of that.
I mean, the other thing about your project, Mark, was I was surprised. I thought there'd be lots of mislabelling, but I hadn't anticipated the leakage, which clearly has its own issues, including infection control.
Yeah, so mainly the lead samples tend to be the 3-in-1 site. So if you're a gay or bisexual man or a sex worker, we swab your throat, your bum, and either your vagina or do a urine sample for men's urethral chlamydia. All of those get pooled into one sample, so only one of those samples need to leak for all 3 not to be processed in terms of getting a false positive diagnosis at another site. So yeah, it's certainly got its challenges.
And dare I ask, if some of you may not be, apologies for this, but is it urine that is mainly leaking, or?
So we do think it's the urine, and we're certainly collecting some specimens that have leaked to see particularly what it is. Whether it is the urine. I suspect there's an element that when people wash their hands after they've done their sample, they're touching the stickers, and any sort of fluid within that request bag would prompt one of the technicians, if I'm right, Nicola, not to process that sample.
Yeah, it's due to contamination, cross-contamination. So if there's any evidence within a bag that there might be a leakage, then we can't process it because it could contaminate all the samples.
Right, so we don't even know what the leakage actually is.
So we think it's either the urine itself, because that's the most likely cause, because
there's universal containers.
Yeah, so what happens is the patient pees into a universal container, and then it gets pipetted into an aptoma tube, and when you pipette the liquid into the aptoma fluid in the tube, it sometimes bubbles, and when you screw the lid on, that bubbled liquid can sit around the rim and actually not become apparent until it's been sat static for a wee while.
Dare I suggest putting them all in separate bags, or is that a huge amount of extra work?
So you, certainly while it's non-electronic, it would increase a lot of work, and actually many years ago when they looked at pooling the samples into 3-in-1, it certainly does reduce your error rate in labelling. So I think, if we did do that, we'd have to look at a balance measuring increasing labelling errors.
I think it's just an example of the detail that you have to go into to be able to find out what's causing the error, isn't it? So, any other questions?
I was, again for you, sorry Mike. I was interested in the pathway that you'd done and whether or not when you were doing that, did you see any obvious system changes, a bit like either electronics or something else that could come out of it?
So we already know there is work going on behind the scenes in terms of getting order comms integrated within our electronic patient record. The issue is our electronic patient record may cease to exist in its current form, and therefore we may be changing and providing it in a new EPR. So that in itself has logistics for the IT team. You know, is it a priority to integrate into an old system? That may change when the trust has got so much work to do. Our IT infrastructure actually comes from LTH rather than LCH. So again, it's sort of getting all of the organisations involved and actually sitting around the table, because the HIV service within LTHT uses that current EPR as well. And so any change can have knock-on effects for two very, busy services.
And is it correct that you can't use ICE order comms at the moment because of the confidentiality, the separation of the clinical records?
Yeah. So when you go to a sexual health service, you get an anonymous GumCAD code and an alias ID, so to speak. So it would mean creating all of these alias IDs on order comms as well. I think there is a reasonable way in which they can do that. It's just getting the systems to actually speak to each other in terms of the coding. I don't know what the actual IT nitty-gritty. But certainly what we wouldn't want to do is for it to integrate into PPM Plus, whereby you would break the law basically and divulging all of that information.
Lisa?
Can I just ask, and you mentioned about patients having to keep coming back and instructing someone coming back, having to come back a number of times. If you haven't done the work that you did, would we have picked that up through feedback, or because that must be cause a lot of anxiety for people?
Yeah, so we certainly do look at the number of DNAs per week within the service. That's been going on for a number of years. We do actively try and get as much patient feedback as we can. The thing about people that attend the sexual health services, they pretty much want to get in and get out. And so I'm sure you might have seen in the news this week that people are less. You've got to be seen within 48 hours of first presentation. That's increasingly difficult in this city. So actually, when something goes wrong and we're trying to get you back a second time, it can take us about 2 weeks for you to get you back into the system. If it goes wrong a second and a third time, you're waiting up to 2 months for that reassurance, which can have a significant impact not only on someone's sex life but on their psychological health if they're worrying that they've got an infection, but also sort of public health concerns around the city in terms of numbers of STIs rising. We really have a lot of work to do in terms of getting enough people through the door faster and getting it right first time in order to reduce the pool of infection that is within Leeds.
Dev, can I ask, or maybe colleagues want to answer because they're here, but did any staff have to start work earlier in order to get the patients coming through earlier in ophthalmology, or were you already here?
We start at 8 anyway, so we're all in clinic at 8. And we're already starting, all the notes should be down by then, shouldn't they, mostly?
Everybody goes down to clinic for 8 o'clock, including me, and we just get set up every day. Nothing's changed for the team.
Right. Anything changed for the better for the team, other than not having that rush? Do you get a slightly more prompt finish at the end of the clinic?
Well, it's continuous all day. There's a changeover at 12:30. So the team change, 2 come down and 2 leave, and there's a handover with another huddle.
Right.
We have 2 huddles
Yeah.
to make sure the handover's smooth, and then it carries on in the afternoon.
Okay.
And then it can go on with the casualty till sometimes 5:30.
Yeah. Good. Any questions for Crystal?
Question around
clearly with some of the changes, this will be having benefits for patients, whether we've had kind of any kind of marked improvements in patient feedback with regards to the patient experience of the scheduling process.
Yeah, the PALs have come down in terms of the amount of people ringing us up complaining about waiting time. They're still very much there, of course they are, but they've come down a lot. And the team, last time I reported, they've been getting cards and stuff to say thank you, which they've not had before. They've got a great thing of chocolates delivered at Christmas as well. So there are some patients that are more happy with us than they previously were, so that's good.
Brilliant.
The other thing we've got recently dabbled in across all of our admin teams is some phone data. So I know RBS and I think the switchboard probably regularly look at phone KPIs, and because we don't have a kind of call centre service, but we've got a lot of admin teams answering a lot of calls. We wanted to start this year to actually look at some of that data and numbers of calls they get, when they get them throughout the day, how many do go unanswered and not answered. So we have been told that is possible, so that's something we'll start looking at on a regular basis.
So Lisa, yeah.
So, Crystal, just two things I wanted to ask you. And one was around, are you sharing all the learning that you've done with other specialties now, so they can, start to take things forward? And then secondly, you mentioned some IT issues. Are they progressing? Are you picking them up?
Yes, so we've got a meeting with IT which I need to get into in the diary, so we've been offered that support, and some of the consultants want to feed into that as well, so that's coming. In terms of sharing learning, we absolutely will do. Head and Neck was sort of supporting us anyway in the first place, so they've shared a lot of what they were doing with us. And one of our triage coordinators has just been recently promoted to another surgical speciality, and he's looking at inpatients, so we're hoping to work with him going forward, so we can take some ideas from them, because we've all got different good things happening within our CSUs, and it's making sure we use that to make sure that patients get good service all over the trust.
Great. Okay. Any other questions? Andy?
Just a comment really, which is so many of the projects that we have, so many of the things that we do map to patient safety or to clinical effectiveness. But today, everything has been about the experience. It's been about improving patient experience, or at least patient experience has been vastly improved by what everyone's doing. And I bang on about patient experience all the time. I think it's if you get that right, then by default you're getting everything else right as well. So it's really nice to hear that we've improved experience for 3 completely different strands of patients today.
No, you're right, and also safety as well, haven't we? Yeah, so, no, but it struck me actually that there's a lot of improved patient experience, and I presume a lot of less hassle if the phone's not ringing as many times with the same issue. It's probably, as you say, staff probably feel better about it. I know you're still probably getting lots of calls, but yeah. Jim?
Just a comment to acknowledge the effort gone in by Crystal, the process owner. Deb is stepping up the team lead for these events. It's on top of all their other work. We know, many of us, how busy particularly Spinal's been, so it's an acknowledgement that they're here reporting out, they're keeping this work going, and as you've heard, with some really impressive improvements. So thanks to both, and not to say, Mikey, some great work there, love your SPC, love some of the phrasing in there, so it's great to hear that collaboration between Leeds Improvement Method, KPO, and the IHA, the other models, we're aligning that better and better, so great to see some of your work there as well. Thanks.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect ending, Jimmy, to report out. You've said it all. So thank you very much, everybody. That was really good, and well done. Congratulations for all the hard work and the improvement in patient experience. And for those of you who are off for the weekend, have a lovely weekend. Thank you.